So before we get started, can everyone hear me fine? In the back, everyone's good? Okay, I prefer not to be broadcast over. It just drives me a little bit nuts. So I will speak loudly. I'm American. I have no actual choice. So first off, the first slide is a lie. This is really my first 127 days as a CTO. The deck was built over the last couple of days, so it covers all of it. My first 90 days just seems like a better title. What we're going to talk about is my first 90 days here at Accurx, what I learned, how I learned it, kind of a high level of based on what I learned, what we're going to do about it, and some key takeaways. Really, I'm kind of just going to tell you a story, hopefully not bore you too much, hopefully give you a few laughs and teach you a few things. Why do you want to listen to me? That's a really good question. I don't know. A little bit about my background. I've been here since the very end of September. I think I was here one day in September, so the truth is probably October. I've been doing this nonsense for more than 25 years. I've literally had every job you can have that is related to developing software. I've worked at this point, almost every company you could possibly work at and work on software. At one point in time, anyone who has had the challenge of working with Active Directory, I did spend about 1.5 years as the test architect for Active Directory, so I'm sorry. So, a little bit of a preamble. So, I went through a couple of companies. So I spent most of my career working in the games industry. And I worked on some games that, a lot of people would recognize, probably a lot of people have played. And then I wandered out of the games industry because I wanted to go do something else for a while. And I found myself going, God, I miss that kind of challenge and mission that came with games. And no offense to anyone in the finance industry, but fintech just didn't do that for me. I was working at a company called Checkout.com, brilliantly successful. I love the people I worked with, and I just couldn't find that motivation. So I set out to go, what company do I want to go to next that really kind of gives me what I had in the games industry and also gives me what I was looking for kind of in terms of kind of having that broader impact and doing something outside of games, because I'd done games for 15 odd years. So I found Accurx. And, I'll talk a little bit about why Accurx in the next slide, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage of what did I see before I joined. So I went through the interview process, like everyone does. The one thing I can say, if anyone has ever interviewed for a CTO role, I've probably done 30 of them in my life. None of them are the same. They are all fucking different. This was one I spent, I think, probably 4 hours with Jacob, including a long hike up in the woods near, our houses are relatively close together. And what I found was an incredibly passionate, incredibly mission-driven CEO who sounded like every founding CEO I've ever talked to at this stage of a business, which was, we used to be so fast. I would just have these ideas and the engineers would just implement it. It would go to production the next day. It was amazing. They're the same engineers. When did they get stupid? Turns out they didn't. The team was about the right size. I've led teams as large as 800, and obviously teams as small as 0 when I was an individual contributor. The one thing I can guarantee you scales with size of team is number of annoying problems that you have to deal with. So I really wanted a team that was small enough that I could know every engineer on my team, know their name, know who they were, really kind of get to know the team. It also helped that Accurx is a hybrid culture in office. We're all in this office here. I wanted a successful company because I wanted to have runway to do things the right way. I didn't want to come in and go, okay, right, so if we don't raise money by Friday, we're in trouble, right? So Accurx is a profitable company, lots of money in the bank, very successful. But critically, things had gone wrong, right? It wasn't a role of stepping in for a CTO that had stepped down. It was just a caretaker role. It was very clearly there were problems in the system. There was something going wrong. They wanted to move away from their former CTO for a reason. A little bit about Accurx today. I mean, like I said, it's a successful company, 560 million SMS messages sent in 2024. And this is a little bit of a shameless plug. because if you're mission aligned, this is a place that matters. Every one of those SMS messages went to a patient, for the most part. Some of them were supportive, but these are things that are not, again, no offense to anyone in the industry, it's not a marketing message. It's not something that's trying to get you to sell something. It's coordinating patient care. It's delivering an outcome or an impact. Again, just kind of plugging Accurx a little bit, which is, how to say this right? You probably wouldn't recognize our product unless you're a doctor or have a doctor in your network of friends. I guarantee you everyone in this room has interacted with the product and probably has no idea that they have. So that's part of the kind of the mission, the impact and the meaning that you can have in doing that. And so it's critical. We've only just begun. I will say it now and I'll say it at the end before we get into the rest of this. Actually, my whole goal here is to hire a lot of people because I have a big problem. I need more people to solve it. The reason I say that now and at the end is one, honesty, but also as we go through the next slides, most of you might want to run away. Some of you actually work here and may want to run away. So I joined the company. What do I see? So I go and I look at the org chart and I go, like almost all of my engineers are clustered around one level band. They're all senior engineers. It's 85%. Actually, I think it's 85.67. I think I had 7 engineers that were junior or senior, so staff, principal, that level. There were more layers of management between the CTO and the individual contributor than I had at Avast when I was leading a function of 600 people. This is a function of 50 people. And if you went around the business and said, what does person X do? In a large number of cases, they went, not totally sure. We brought in a chief product officer maybe 18 months ago who had brought in some more robust planning processes and kind of borrowed from Spotify GSD. But if you went and looked at GSD, which is the main thing that we looked at and talked about at the company level, you would not find a single investment in our technology. You'd see a lot of features, a lot of things that needed to be delivered for customers, and you wouldn't see a single thing about the way that engineers work on a daily basis. This is an interesting slide, and I'll tell you what this is. So about a month into my journey, we had a board presentation. And I went, I need to go show the board where we are today. So I went to our wonderful senior DevOps and went, Callum, what metrics do we have that I can show, like how much code we've done, how many releases done, how many successful things we've done? After a bunch of scrambling, this is the best we could do. We actually didn't really know. I sat down with Callum and I said, okay, well, how many times have we pushed to production, successfully pushed our product to production? His answer was, I have no clue. The number at the bottom is from a product called GetDX. Talk about that in a second. These are all sample numbers because we didn't actually roll it out by the time of the board meeting. But I had to sit in front of the board and kind of go, here's what I found, early stages, here's my plans around it. But also, when I want to present operational metrics and I want to present them to the board, the people who are basically approving decisions we make, approving share options and all of that, and I had to candidly say, I kind of don't know. I kind of can't prove how much we've done. I talked about the org structure. So this was the org structure for an organization of 70 total people, right? So you had the CTO, you had a VP of engineering, you had an engineering director that reported to them, 2 tech directors, which are really principal engineers, an SEM that reported to them, an EM that reported to the SEM, and then the ICs down at the bottom going, where do I work? Atina is laughing. She's one of the engineers on the team. So clearly, we had some problems. So the first thing I did was, okay, and this was literally the first action I took. The first decision I made was, I need to understand better what's going on. There's clearly problems going on. So I went and got finance to approve a product called GetDX. I actually quite like it. If you're not familiar with it, it's a breakaway company from, the CEOs are like they were the contributors to Dora, contributors to Space, the developer experience VP at Google. They went off and founded a company. And so Laura Tencho is the CTO or CEO of the company. There's a really interesting conversation with her. And she built all these ways of kind of automatedly using automation to measure engineering effectiveness, not productivity, but effectiveness. And she said she founded GetDX based on a single epiphany, which is the best way to understand what's going on in your engineering team is not to measure them, it's to ask them. So GetDX has some other things in it now, but what it really is a structured, transparent survey tool for asking engineers what's going on in your day-to-day workflow, what are your problems? So we did that, and we'll kind of talk a little bit in a second about some of the things that it led to. And then I started digging into the code myself because I really wanted to understand what was going on. I used a bunch of tools for that. Talk a little bit about some of them and some more. So I used CodeScene. I love CodeScene. If you haven't used it, if you want to get a good overview of a relatively large code base very, very quickly, it's a great tool. It is bloody expensive, so I used it for the 30-day demo, and then I used a bunch of Python tools to kind of extract the same data. But man, I lost days of time just going down the rabbit hole of, it does beautiful things, like it goes through the entire history of your Git repo and looks at all the files that changed, who changed those files, and then compares that to your team structure. And so it goes and looks at it and goes, are your teams actually working on the same thing? What was really interesting is we went back and I sat with our chief product officer, and we talked to the teams that were working well and teams that were working poorly, and we went and looked at the data and we went, yep. The team that was struggling was the team that was constantly working on different things and spent more of their time working with the other teams around them than they did working with each other. I could talk for hours about this. I love this product. And the visualizations are beautiful, at least for a visualization nerd like myself. It's bloody expensive. And I used Lizard, which is a cyclomatic complexity. It's a code analysis tool, and a bunch of awful Python scripts that I will not put up on the screen because I'm embarrassed by them, but it got the job done. And what that gave me is a map of the code base and allowed me to go, okay, what files change a lot? What files have a huge amount of complexity? And start going and digging into those and looking at, that's interesting. Sometimes you go and go, oh, yep, that makes sense. That should be complex. Other times you go in and go, oh God, close that, walk away. And then I did a series of presentations from our principal engineers, which was kind of whiteboard out the architecture. How's it look? How's it supposed to look? Because one of the things that we didn't have is documentation. We had I should have put it in the deck, which is a beautiful automated slide of how all the services talk. And it basically looks like a spider web, right? And not nearly that well organized. It's basically a bunch of servers, they all talk to each other. Good luck. So here's an example. So some of these I got from CodeScene, some of these from others. So 47% of the files in our main repository have a primary author who no longer works here. The repository for a company of 50 is 2.2 million lines of code. The chart over on the far left-hand side is the total amount of cyclomatic complexity aggregated for the data in our primary repo over time. So I basically just did a snapshot of the database every month since the repo was created, and basically summed up the total amount of cyclomatic complexity. So what do you notice? It's basically a monotonic increase of just ever increasing complexity. Now and what's interesting about this is the graph that I would expect to see for a company that wasn't successful. If you were continuing to chase product market fit, absolutely, I expect to see this graph. But we found product market fit around probably August, maybe December of 2022. Do you notice a deceleration in the graph? Didn't happen. So really, the other thing down here is if you look at the total amount of time the team gets to spend working on new and interesting things versus maintaining the database. So this is from GitDX. So if you compare it to the industry average, so the 50th percentile of the industry, which is indexed for technology companies with less than 100 software engineers, we spend roughly 20% less of our time building new and interesting and cool stuff than the bare average company. Not a good one. If we go look at the P95, it's probably another 20% higher than that. So what we had was, and a number that's not on the board, but I'll tell you because it's interesting, is we had a company that took on a lot of its personality of its original CTO. So my predecessor, brilliant engineer, I believe first employee of the company, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. If you go look at the total number of lines of code committed to the repository and total number of lines of code deleted from the repository over the history of Accurx, my predecessor did 6 times more lines of code in aggregate so basically he did more lines of code than the next 6 software engineers combined. That includes the actual technical founder. Absolutely brilliant, high volume coder, could hold a tremendous amount of complexity in his head. So what did he do? I threw code at problems. So you have a code base that has business logic literally everywhere. I haven't actually found it in JSON files yet, but it's probably there. So here's a little bit about some of the tools I used for it. I used Lizard a lot, CodeScene a lot. PyDriller I used. This is just kind of a shout out for quality. I didn't use it. Quality used to be Code Climate. It's now a CLI tool. And the reason I didn't use it is when I started at Accurx, they did not support .NET. About a month ago, they did the .NET implementation. I tried. It's a Ruby tool. I got it about 70% working for .NET and then gave up and got distracted with other things. They eventually brought it out. It's a beautiful, beautiful tool. It's also, caveat, the world went wrong when we left the command line. I am overly in love with command line tools. So take everything I say that involves a command line tool with a giant lump of salt. But it's a beautiful command line tool. It aggregates all your linters and style guides and SAST and all of that into this wonderful format, gives you lines of code, gives you both cyclomatic and cognitive complexity. I won't bore you with the difference between the two. I used an awful lot of ChatGPT and Claude, mostly to fix my shitty Python, and way more Google Sheets and Excel files than you would like to visualize. So that's the code system. So successful company, dug into it. So what do we find? An incredibly motivated, an incredibly mission-aligned team that are, and this isn't just pandering, are an absolute joy to work with. I look forward to coming to work every day. And they were kind of beaten. Candidly, if you look at the survey data and you talk to them privately, they were in this position where they knew the right things to do, absolutely knew it, right? None of the stuff that I've put on the board and talked about in the stuff that I've done was news to anyone in the engineering team. They knew it. They just weren't able to do it. Our developer satisfaction, so the last survey we took of eNPS of the developer team before I joined was -40. The most recent one was 0. I was so happy with that 0, I can't even describe. But it just, and our GitDX number, so one of the things that it does is developer experience. It's the second number on the GitDX slide. We're 25 points below industry average for developer experience. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? We've got a lot of cruft in our code base. We have 2.2 million lines of code. Of those 2.2 million lines of code, I think 1.5 are generated. I think 1.2 of them are entity framework migrations. Now, that's a little bit of a lie. said for dramatic effect, we actually rebased. We dropped that number by 900,000. So, but yeah, we hadn't rebased since 2020. And we had gotten to a development culture that was very product and delivery centric, which isn't a bad thing, but it was taken to an extreme. We got to a point where the development team, the mantra was, don't break anything, avoid complexity because 47% of the code was written by somebody else, so figure out another way to do it. And if you can defer a problem for 6 months, do. Well, we deferred a problem for 6 months again and again and again for 8 years until we got to the point where, oh shit, we have problems. And and some of them were I mean, they're success-based problems. I think we just recently got rid of our last integer index in a SQL database, roughly 3 months before that table would have stopped to function and the entire infrastructure would have fallen over. I sleep better at night now that we've done that. So what do we do? I don't know if you're all Martin Fowler fans, but if you go to his website, there's a really good article by the ThoughtWorks guys on basically transforming an engineering team, or rather rebuilding and re-architecting a company. So the ThoughtWorks guys are basically a consultant firm that specializes in rebuilding broken companies. And there's something that they say in there that I will paraphrase. I'll probably get it wrong, but I want to paraphrase it, which is they regularly go into companies and they see the bodies of failed re-architecture attempts, often strata of them. And one of the things he says is, and that resonates very much with my belief and what I've experienced, is that if you go into a company that has architectural challenges and you try and fix it as an engineering problem, you will fail. You will. The company didn't set out to build a shitty architecture. No one intended that way. I don't even think my predecessor intended it that way. There's a culture, there's a process, there's a structure that came into place that allowed that to come into existence. And it was a million decisions that made sense at the time. But you didn't look at it in aggregate, and you never stepped back and went, uh-oh. And so if you want to fix an engineering challenge, you have to fix a people challenge. You have to fix a culture challenge, you have to fix a process challenge. And actually, my goal in all of this is to build a culture and a system that if I walked away and just had those kind of people, process, and structural changes, and never did another thing at the company, the architecture would fix itself. And everything I do from here is about making that re-architecture and better system come into existence much, much sooner, rather than waiting until, 2030 for it to come into existence. So some of the things, implemented a reverse Conway strategy, meh. So if you're familiar with Conway's law, so given sufficient time, every organization ships its org chart. What's a reverse Conway maneuver? Org for the architecture you want, not the architecture you have. And again, given sufficient time, eventually the boundaries in the org chart will show up in your code base, even if they don't appear now. Now, you can ask the engineers. And it annoys the shit out of engineers because it feels incredibly inefficient. Why the hell did you put me on the team with this person? Like, these systems don't work together. Aha, but they should. And you can ask the engineers, right? This is almost a mantra. They're probably bored of hearing it from me, which is leave the campsite cleaner than you found it. The cheapest time to fix a bug is today. The cheapest time to fix a problem is today. So if you're in a line of code, clean it up. If the code has 17 different patterns and there's a set of patterns for the company, migrate it to the pattern. Do the testing, do the re-architecture, do the refactoring when the context is in your head. Because if you don't, you're eventually going to come back and have to do all that work to develop the context again after 17 times more that this has happened. That's how we got to where we are. And obviously, reorg, streamline, reverse Conway. So this is the current org chart. Some title changes. Tech directors are now called principal engineers. But dramatically reduced the number of layers between individual contributors and me, which hopefully is a good thing. You'd have to ask them how they feel about that. But really tried to create much more clarity. The other thing, and I didn't talk about it before, is that our investment in our core technology, our platform, like our platform organization, the people building systems to make our engineers better. If you looked at the org chart, they didn't exist. They did exist, but they were just interleaved into teams under random EMs or SEMs that were doing product stuff. And the SEMs were incentivized to deliver product. So how much time did they give to the DevOps team? None. How much time did they give to product services, which is the team that builds kind of our core data infrastructure? A lot, but only in the context of, oh my God, guys, we're having an incident in the database. Can you fix it today? I feel a little bit sorry for that team, by the way. And so hopefully now by making the platform team, and I don't think this is the perfect org, this isn't an ideal org. All org charts are imperfect, and they're all designed to transition from where we are to where we want to be. And given a year or 18 months, I'll probably have to change this again, or they'll change me. Whole different conversation. But really, because it exists to drive an evolution, and then we're going to be in a much better place as an engineering team, and a much better place in our technology, and then we'll go to the next evolution of this, continually trying to drive for what is a transformative engineering culture. So these are kind of the big initiatives that are driving through them. The team will recognize these. These are straight out of the 2025 engineering vision. Refine our foundations. This is really invest in our core DevOps, invest in our pipelines, clean up our build and test infrastructure so we have better, more reliable testing so the team can rely on it. We can push builds out faster and know what's going on. This is also improving our observability, which right now is basically logging in prayer. Elevate our tooling. One of the other patterns that we ran too long is we stayed with the plucky startup company. What's the cheapest thing I can buy? We can afford to buy decent tools for our teams. And it was only a little bit bribery. One of the other first actions I did is make sure that we upgraded the laptop, all of our Windows laptops, and we'll take a look at our Mac laptops soon. Hopefully some people have gotten new laptops. See, although that's worth talking about for just a second, and tell me if I'm running too long. Give me a microphone and an audience, man, and we'll be here till ask the team, they know. So an interesting thing, if you have aspirations to get into engineering leadership and really into the C-suite, that was an interesting one because we refreshed our laptops ahead of refresh schedule. And I had to go justify that to our VP of Finance, who see story about we buy the cheapest possible tools. Now, I think our VP of Finance is absolutely amazing. She's done a great job. She's very conservative with spend. So basically, I had to go in and justify the impact of it in a way that she would understand. And so we went and did some very light numbers on how long it takes to open a project file, how long a compile takes, how long all the things, and be able to go, okay, well, if you assume that an engineer spends 50% of their time doing individual contributor work, of that time, this percentage is opening and migrating things. I did a calculation of time savings, worked that back, put that in the table, and basically said, look, new laptops will pay for themselves will break even point in roughly 6 months post-purchase. And so it made it a really easy thing. And so one of the things to talk about is use your skill at data and analytics, use your skill at thinking logically, and then go put yourself in your audience's shoes and tell the story that's true, but framed in the way that they need to do. You look very confused. Is it just that the timeline on the ROI? Laptops are relatively cheap. Engineers are pretty expensive. It might be faster than that. I think the laptops were 18 months old. They were crappy laptops. They were awful, but different story. Unify our process is really about getting everyone into the GSD process and getting technology, getting our engineering investments visualized in the same thing so that the product team is thinking about engineering. And part of this is training the product team, right? You want to get to a place where your product team is pushing your engineers to do technology investments. It's the marshmallow test, if you're familiar with that. right? Which is, I could get a product feature today at the cost of every subsequent product feature costing 10 or 20% more, or I could delay this one product feature now, and every product feature costs a little bit less. And so is this product feature so important that I don't need the next 10? The way I say it to the team is, one of our first values as a company is fix healthcare communication. And I will often say to product, our mission is not make healthcare communication a little bit better. Our mission is fix healthcare communication. And fixing healthcare communication is a lot of features between here and there. And so the things that make it faster to build the next feature are way more important than the things that get the feature done today. Now, it's always a balancing act. I don't win every argument, but I can pretty much talk anyone to death. So I win more than you would think. And the last one is kicking off a re-architecture project, which is kind of the case study in what I mean when I say build a culture so that what I think needs to exist will come into existence naturally. So we're doing a piece of work called the conversations domain, which is basically building using domain-driven design to kind of fraction out a core piece of our architecture, look at how we handle our database, look at how we handle our communication, and build kind of the right way to do it and do that out as a model of the rest of the organization. The goal is, and that is all to make sure that the re-architecture happens sooner, to realize the benefits of it sooner. Because if I got the org right, and I made the culture changes right, I don't know if it would be a conversations domain, but the domain-oriented re-architecture would happen naturally. That's kind of the goal. What lessons did I learn? Developer experience matters. The tech debt management is absolutely crucial. Tech debt isn't a bad thing, right? The Accurx exists and is successful because they onboarded a ton of tech debt. It's like buying a house. If you've bought a house, you took on debt. That was good debt, usually. But there's also bad debt. And there's also not servicing your debt. Right? If you run with a house analogy, buying a house is great debt. It's not so great if you forget to pay your mortgage and they come and take your house away. Documentation is vital. If you're having transitions like that, you've got to do documentation. I have all kinds of theories on how and where and how you optimally do documentation, and I hope for a day when AI will write documentation for us. That's a different conversation. Your technical strategy and your outcomes needs to be clearly tied to the business outcomes. Company needs to know why you're doing it, what you're doing it, because if you're fighting the business, you're going to lose. If you're explaining to the business why what you're doing is in their best interests, you'll be able to get a lot more done than you think you can. And this is kind of tie your investments directly to financial outcomes. The laptops, a lot of the things that we want to do, the ability to buy better versions of software and higher tier versions of software and buy some of the SSO stuff that I want to do. It's all about kind of proving to the company that you're thinking the right way. The other thing, if you're a technology leader moving into a new function, the first few things you do really matter. It sets the tone. And so if you go train your finance person that you're thinking business first, outcomes first, cost first, well really ROI first, the next thing that you need to do that's a little bit harder to prove, they start from an assumption that you're thinking the right way. And so laying that foundation, laying that framework is absolutely critical. Culture shifts precede technical improvements. You can do technical improvements first, they won't stick, right? It'll be so the opposite of the story I told about reverse Conway. If you don't do that, if you just, come in, hire an army of code elves to come in and re-architect your software and change nothing else and then walk away, what'll happen is you'll come back a year later and your code will be just a different version of the crap that it was when you started. The culture drives the tech change, not the other way around. Kind of says the same thing. And continuous improvement in ingrained culture, that constant investment in how we work, what we do, and how we do it is the kind of core of the culture that we're trying to build. And as I promised, shameless plug, if coming and working on you know, probably what is it, 1.2 million lines of code, C#, primarily C# code base, also a little bit of TypeScript. Sounds super fun and interesting. And if you want to join a bunch of people who are pretty motivated, pretty awesome to work with, but we have lots of problems and big challenges, scan the wall. I think we've got 20 odd headcount that we're hiring for. And so if I didn't frighten you away with everything I talked about through this, give us a ring. That's me.